Arthur Bellamy. I was 68 the year my son taught me how little he valued love. I stood in his brand new mansion, cold marble and recessed lighting, holding a hand-carved wooden music box my late wife Martha had spent her final months restoring for our grandson Leo. My hands smelled like beeswax. The box smelled like Martha. Julian snatched it before I could kneel to give it to Leo. That ugly piece of junk doesn't belong in this house. He walked to the glass fireplace and threw it into the flames. The fire caught one corner immediately. 40 years of patience turning to ash in front of 30 strangers who held their champagne glasses tighter and looked away. Leo didn't scream. He stood there in his little dress shoes, watching his grandmother's last gift disappear. I didn't shout. Martha always said silence hits harder than any fist. I reached into the flames and pulled the box out with my bare hands. The fire bit into my palms. The pain was sharp and honest. Nothing like the ache my son carved into my heart. I wrapped the scorched box under my arm, knelt beside Leo, and whispered, "Grandpa's got it safe." 2 days later, the fire had melted a hidden latch. The false bottom popped open. My hands started shaking. What Martha had hidden inside was worth more than his entire house. To understand why I reached into that fire, you need to know what he was truly trying to burn. For 40 years, my hands were covered in sawdust and varnish. I restored antiques. I took broken, forgotten things and gave them a second life. Martha was the true heart of that workshop. When the cancer took her, she spent her final 6 months at her little workbench, carving and polishing that music box for Leo. She wanted to give him something that would outlast us both. Julian never understood that. He was a tech investor, always chasing the next flashy trend, always drowning in debt to keep up appearances. His wife, Vanessa, was no better. They measured everything by its price tag. They didn't see the love in Martha's careful carving. They only saw wood that didn't match their imported Italian marble floors. The housewarming party was a spectacle. 60 guests sipping expensive champagne. Leo came running across the hardwood floor, his eyes wide with excitement, reaching for his grandmother's gift. Julian intercepted him. He snatched the box right out of the boy's hands. "That ugly piece of junk doesn't belong in this house," he sneered. He walked straight to the massive stone fireplace and tossed it into the roaring flames. The fire caught the dry cedar instantly. I watched the flames curl around Martha's final work. Leo didn't throw a tantrum. He just stood there, his small shoulders slumping, watching his grandmother's promise turn to smoke. It was a silent, devastating heartbreak that cut deeper than any scream. Vanessa didn't even look up from her phone. She just muttered something about Egyptian cotton sheets being much nicer. I didn't yell. I reached into the fire and pulled the burning box out with my bare hands. The flames bit into my palms, leaving angry red blisters. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the dull, heavy ache in my chest. I wrapped the scorched wood in my jacket, knelt beside my weeping grandson, and walked out of that cold, soulless house. I could still hear Julian laughing at his own joke as I walked to my truck. The sound followed me down the driveway, a cruel reminder of the man my son had become. The drive back to my quiet, dusty workshop took 40 minutes, but it felt like 40 years. My hands throbbed under the cold water from the sink. I looked at the yellow kitchen table where Martha used to drink her morning coffee. The house felt so empty without her. I thought about the 40 years I spent building a life, teaching my son the value of hard work, only to watch him burn it all away for a shallow party trick. I sat in my workshop, icing my burned hands, staring at the blackened wood. That's when I noticed the latch was bent. The intense heat of the fire had melted the hidden lock. With a pair of fine tweezers, I carefully pried the scorched wood apart. The hidden lock gave way with a soft, metallic click. My breath caught in my throat. Beneath the false bottom lay a heavy, wax-sealed envelope and a small, vintage velvet pouch. My hands, still stinging from the burns, trembled as I broke the red wax seal. Inside was a thick, registered trust document and a letter written in Martha's elegant, looping handwriting. I opened the velvet pouch next. A single, folded piece of heavy parchment slid out. It was an original, unrecorded property deed. I read the legal jargon twice before the reality truly hit me. 20 years ago, using the inheritance from her own parents, Martha had secretly purchased 200 acres of prime coastal land. She had held on to it quietly, letting the value grow while the coastline developed. According to the attached appraisal from a top real estate firm, that land was now worth over $28 million. $28 million. The staggering number echoed in the quiet, dusty workshop, ringing in my ears. Julian had just carelessly thrown $28 million into a roaring fireplace simply because he thought it didn't match his expensive marble floors. I unfolded the letter. I could almost smell her lavender perfume as I read her words. "My dearest Arthur," she wrote. "If you are reading this, the box has been tested. Julian only ever sees the price tag of things, never their true value. If he respects this box, he deserves to know our secret. But if he destroys it, he has proven he only cares about money. This land is for Leo. It is his protection, his future, and his freedom from his father's greed. Protect him, my love. Protect our boy." Tears finally spilled over my lashes, hot and fast, blurring the beautiful ink on the page. I pressed the paper to my lips, sobbing quietly in the empty room. She had known. Even while the cancer was stealing her breath, she had seen the monster our son was becoming. She had spent her final months building a fortress for Leo, stitch by stitch, carve by carve. She had hidden a fortune in plain sight, trusting me to be the guardian of her legacy. I sat there for a long time, holding the letter to my chest, listening to the old house settle around me. The physical pain in my hands faded into the background, replaced by a profound, heavy clarity. Martha had given me a weapon, but I didn't want to use it for revenge. I wanted to use it for justice, to protect the innocent boy. The workshop was completely silent, save for the ticking of the old clock. I took a deep breath and stood up. It was time to fight. I didn't feel joy. I felt a cold, hard resolve. Julian didn't just burn a toy. He signed his own legal death warrant. I took the documents to Sarah Lynn, a sharp estate lawyer recommended by a colleague. She read the trust papers twice, her eyes narrowing behind her glasses. "This is absolutely bulletproof, Arthur," she said finally, tapping the thick parchment. "Martha registered this through a licensed attorney in Austin. The trust is irrevocable. Leo is the sole beneficiary, and you are the sole trustee. Julian has zero legal claim to this property." I let out a long breath I didn't know I was holding. But Sarah's expression didn't soften. She pulled a separate file from her desk. "However," she said quietly, "we need to talk about your son." Sarah revealed a dark truth. Julian's flashy tech firm was collapsing. He was leveraged to the hilt, drowning in millions in hidden debt to keep up his lavish lifestyle. "He needs $28 million to save himself," she explained, sliding a financial report across the desk. "Men in his desperate position don't hear that money without trying to grab it. And his first move will be to come after you." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. My own flesh and blood was looking at me not as a father, but as a vault to crack open. The next morning, the legal papers arrived. Julian had officially filed for an emergency conservatorship over me. He was claiming I was mentally unfit, suffering from early-stage dementia, and a danger to myself. He was using the housewarming incident, reaching into a fire with bare hands, as his primary proof of erratic behavior. If a judge believed him, Julian would be appointed as my legal guardian. He would control the trust. He would control the land. He would control Leo's future. I looked down at my bandaged hands. He had already laid the groundwork without me knowing it. It was a disturbingly common tactic in bitter inheritance disputes. Sarah handed me a card for a former state investigator. Within 48 hours, the file he assembled made me physically sick. Julian wasn't just greedy, he was deeply cruel. The investigator obtained school records. Julian was emotionally abusing Leo, forcing the 7-year-old to perform tedious coding demos for his wealthy investors, and locking him in his bedroom when his grades slipped. But the final blow was a flight itinerary. Julian had booked one-way tickets to a non-extradition country for himself and Leo, scheduled to leave in 10 days. He wasn't taking his son because he loved him. He was taking him because Leo was the key to $28 million. I stared at the boarding passes until the ink blurred. My grandson was drowning, and I had been too blind to see it. I wiped my face, stood up, and looked at the evidence on my desk. The anger in my chest was gone, replaced by a cold focus. They thought they were trapping an old man. They didn't realize they were walking into a courtroom with a loaded gun of evidence. It was time for the hearing. The courtroom was quiet, smelling of old wood and floor wax. Julian sat across the aisle, projecting the perfect image of a concerned son. His expensive lawyer painted me as a confused, erratic old man who played with fire. I just sat there, my bandaged hands resting calmly on my lap. I didn't need to speak. Sarah, my lawyer, stood up and completely dismantled their lie. She didn't raise her voice. She just presented the facts. First, she played the audio recording of Julian threatening to put me in a care facility. Then, she handed the judge the investigator's file detailing how Julian locked his 7-year-old son in a dark room for bad grades. The courtroom grew dead silent. Finally, she slid the original trust documents across the polished table. "This land is worth $28 million, Sarah stated clearly. And it belongs solely to Leo. The petitioner is not protecting his father, he is attempting to steal his own son's inheritance to cover his massive debts." Julian's confident facade shattered. He looked at the judge, desperate, but the damage was done. The judge stared at him with absolute disgust. "The petition for conservatorship is denied with prejudice," she ruled, her gavel echoing sharply. "Furthermore, I am granting emergency custody of Leo to his grandfather, and I am referring this matter to the district attorney for elder abuse and fraud." Julian was ruined. His lawyer packed his briefcase, refusing to look at him. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just stood up, walked over to where he sat frozen in his chair, and looked him in the eyes. "You wanted to know what was in the box, son," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It was your mother's final lesson. And you failed it." I turned around and walked out. The heavy oak doors slowly closed behind me, shutting out his pathetic excuses. Walking out of the courthouse, the sun felt warmer than it had in years. But the real victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was waiting right there in the back seat of my old car. The back seat of my old car held a small boy with a stuffed dinosaur and a worn backpack. When Leo saw me, he did not just run, he flew into my arms, burying his crying face deep into my jacket. We drove back to my quiet, dusty workshop, the familiar smell of sawdust and old coffee wrapping around us like a warm, protective hug. That evening, I carefully repaired the scorched music box. I replaced the melted brass latch and gently polished the cedar wood. When I finally turned the small key, a beautiful, gentle tune filled the room. Leo looked up, his bright eyes shining, and smiled for the first time in months. Watching him, I realized something truly profound about life. Family is not about blood. It is always about who shows up when the world gets dark. If someone treats your love like trash, just let them burn. You never owe your peace to people who only value your price tag. I held my grandson close, listening to the music box play its gentle song. My name is Arthur. And I am still restoring what truly matters in this beautiful life today and every single day forward.